Welcome to the Spawn Chunks, episode number 338, recorded Monday, February 24th, 2025. This is a podcast all about Minecraft, available across all of your favorite podcasting platforms, including a video version on YouTube. If you are enjoying the show, please consider subscribing wherever you're listening to this. My name is Joel Duggan, and joining me, as always, is my friend Johnny, otherwise known as Tabletop Pixel Riffs. Hello, sir.
Hello! I have been Tabletop Pixel Riffs occasionally, and I will be again. But in the meantime, Joel and I have been talking a little bit about tabletop stuff, a little bit about what we've been up to over the weekends, and Joel's cinema-going plans. He's off to see the new Captain America film, and we've been chatting it up about Marvel TV shows, movies, and other stuff that we've been watching and into. We've been doing that on the Render Distance. That's the extended version of the podcast, which patrons can get if you sign up at patreon.com/thespawnchunks and support the show at any of our paid tiers. We have a few community events coming up for our patrons as well. On Saturday, March 1st, we'll be doing our monthly Minecraft Hangout, technically for February, but you'll have the entire month of February. February ends up being a shorter month every year anyway. So hopefully on March 1st, a bunch of our patrons are going to show us what they've been up to in Minecraft this last month, and we're very much looking forward to that. News about the Patreon as well. Our monthly subscriptions on the Patreon page are now live, replacing the old per episode subscription model that we had previously. We are still doing weekly episodes, of course, so nothing has changed there, but it's more about supporting the podcast as it rolls over month to month. Instead of basing support on the number of episodes published per month, support is now a simple and consistent per-month subscription. So if you are a new patron, the date that you sign up will be your support date going forward. Instead of being billed at the beginning of every month, you'll basically just be billed monthly on the date that you chose to sign up on that particular month. So, for example, if February 24th is the day you sign up, your support will be transferred every month on the 24th as a rolling subscription. If you're an existing patron, your support date is going to remain the first of the month, as it has been as long as you remain a patron of the show. If you have to cancel and resubscribe at any point, your account will basically work as though you were a new patron and be billed from whatever your fresh sign-up date is. So hopefully all of that housekeeping made sense to the folks who it applies to, and thank you as always for your support on the show. Once again, if you're interested in signing up, that's over at patreon.com/thespawnchunks.
Speaking of support, how have you been supporting your Minecraft habit this past week? What have you been up to?
Oh boy, my Minecraft habit has been a little bit harsh to me. I died in the process of making a froglight farm this week, and thankfully all of my gear is netherite, so while I died in lava, I only lost a couple of things, a couple of shulker boxes with a minor amount of resources in, and one set of elytra that I had a backup for, so that was fine. And what I got out of it was a froglight farm built in a bastion remnant. This is the treasure bastion one, which has the magma cube spawner in it. I think it's in a warped forest biome, so we don't get too many other spawns in there. Probably very little chance of piglins refreshing their spawns in that place. And there was an enderman wandering around the farm at one point, so I think he's a native spawn to the biome. But this is the design where you just clear out the area underneath the magma cube spawner that you find hanging from underneath that bridge at the bottom of the bastion, just next to the treasure room. I've turned that into a 13 by 13 pit filled with alternating blocks of powdered snow. So those break down the magma cubes into the smallest possible magma cube, the only one where the hitbox doesn't intersect with the powder snow blocks, but then they get hoovered up by a team of frogs. I've got 2 of each color, and that seems pretty adequate for the supply of froglights. The other thing is allays are now the collection mechanism for this, and the main reason behind that is not wanting to clear out the lava lake that this bastion remnant sits in all the way below the bastion itself, because if you dig down more than a couple of blocks from where I am right now, you hit a really deep lava lake. And so instead of going down there with gravel or scaffolding or whatever to clear out the entire thing, I decided I was just going to change up what the collection mechanism is from being, a pad of hoppers or a hopper minecart running underneath. I decided I'll just get 1 allay picking up every type of froglight and a 4th allay picking up the magma cream. And that works really well. All I have to do is stand behind 2 trapdoors, which have a hopper at the bottom of them, and so the allays will try and fly to me. Because I'm standing within a couple of blocks of that to AFK, they just throw the items at the trapdoors, and they just simply fall into the hopper below the trapdoors, which is a really straightforward way of AFKing this farm. You'd need to be near the farm anyway, because it's a 16-block radius from the spawner where it will activate, so it worked surprisingly well just to bring a team of allays over. In fact, I think moving the frogs and allays to the bastion was the most difficult thing, but once that was done, the rest of it was plain sailing. Like I said, did end up breaking a block and dying to lava in the process, but all in all, worth doing, and froglights were one of those things that I didn't have a great supply of so far, so happy to have ticked that off the list.
And probably makes your spawn area feel a little bit tidier too, without a bunch of frogs leashed to a pole.
Yes, yeah. I have a bunch of them still in the frog breeding area, which I'm planning on moving to a basalt delta at some point later in the series. I'm currently flattening an area of that and clearing it out, and it gets way more magma cube spawns than the spawner will, but I don't think I'll need froglights in such a huge volume for a very long time, at least. So at least now, being able to AFK there for an hour and having a few stacks of every kind of froglight, I think it'll probably do about 9 stacks an hour. So yeah, like it runs super effectively at the Bastion, and I think only if I'm building like massive signs or, you know, lighting up an area extensively with froglights will I need anything higher output for a single player world.
I've always really liked these kind of magma cube snow farms. I think it's a really ingenious way of cutting the magma cubes down to size. You know, it's very similar to using iron golems to kill slimes, you know, in certain, or not kill slimes, but like lure slimes. You know, you use the golems to pull the slimes into the magma blocks, and then the slimes get cut down that way. So it's almost like the reverse, you know, like you've got to, instead of getting the fire under the slimes, you got to get the snow on top of the magma cubes, you know, like it's a really cool, like yin yang in Minecraft that's similar but different in how it deals with the mobs. I've always really liked that model.
Yeah, and the ecosystem here is an interesting one because, of course, the frogs will eat up the small magma cubes, but the larger magma cubes don't attack the frogs, and neither of them are interested in the allays, so the only threat to any of the mobs in here is that they get stuck in powder snow for too long. Allays won't take enough damage from powder snow that any of them are at risk of dying, and I'm pretty sure the frogs are all too short, so even if they were to jump upwards into the powder snow, they'll be able to fall straight through again, and they shouldn't take any damage from that either. So it's very safe for the passive mobs that you'd need to maybe replace. It would be more difficult to get them back there. And the magma cubes are dealt with very, very easily. So yeah, that's the only thing I've done in the survival guide this week. I'll hop back in this week and probably start renovating the area of this bastion to look a little bit more in keeping with the froglight farm idea. Might decorate it with frog colors or like a giant tongue somewhere or something like that. It'd be kind of fun. But outside of that, I have nothing else going on in the survival guide until later this week. How about you, Joel? What's new on the Citadel?
So I'm getting a lot closer to finishing up the renovation on the old potato farm. It's basically just bringing the fields and the surrounding area up to snuff with the landscaping and design that I've gotten a lot better at over the last 4 years. For anybody coming in new, this is the first thing I built in the West Hill Valley, and it was over 4 years ago. And so it needed a lot of adjusting to kind of make sure that it felt like it fit with the rest of the environment. And we're getting down to the finer details now. So I took the time to finish the retaining wall at the top of the north part of the farm and some of the grass bits that are between that and the road. And then I went through and I finished up the rest of the paths. I had to move my shulker boxes. I had this giant shulker box island in the main entrance of the farm, which made sense when I was working on the house and the surrounding areas. But now that we're getting farther away from the house and we're looking at like the farm road, the main entrance, how it connects to the main north road, I had to move the shulker boxes because they were covering up places that I need to do some texturing. And so again, we've got more blocks to play with now than I did at first. You know, like I've got packed mud, I've got rooted dirt, I've got either pale oak, which only worked in a couple places, or acacia bark, you know, which we had before, but trying to move those textures in and like move from the gray road into the brown dirt. I found that both acacia and pale oak have been pretty helpful depending on the context. And I've also been dabbling in a little bit of the grass and doing some of the moss and moss carpet, things that, again, I did not have when I was building this 4 years ago, but also techniques I didn't really think to use, like dropping bush blocks or leaf blocks for everybody into the ground to make it look like thistle or rough grass or crabgrass or something. And so doing that around entrances and around the roads has been really cool. It really kind of makes the farm feel like it's been around for a while, which is nice. And there's a path that goes around the back. The one thing I didn't do was a lot of work on the side roads, because I still have, there's like a property that's probably going to be like a little fishing house, and that's been untouched. There's like a foundation there just for kind of placement. The riverbanks have not been worked on, and the what's it called? The apiary, the bee farm has not been worked on. So what I like to do in these situations with road textures and these grassy patches that are between my builds, I like to do the builds first. So I'll finish the potato farm, and then I'll do on the bee farm, and then I'll do all the points in between. And that way, if you have to adjust the road, the wall, or the grass to accommodate a cool idea for your bee farm, you're not uprooting texture that you spent like a couple hours on stream laying down. Same thing with the fishing hut. So if I decide to put that fishing hut there, and maybe I want to have like hanging fish drying in the sun or something like that, I don't want to have my perfectly textured road be like, well, it's in the way and now I have to move it. So I'm trying to be more efficient in that way, and just think about those things going forward. But it was a pretty simple week. It was several streams, but really the fields are so large. This farm, I really bit off more than I can chew when I first planted this farm back in November of 2020. And I'm glad that I've broken it up into different crops now. It looks a lot better, but it's still big. And it took me a long time to do all of the path work, to the point where like I ran out of rooted dirt, had to grow more azalea to get more rooted dirt. And then I also had to go get more moss. Like I ran out of all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, the detail pass is always worth it, though. I think it's like,
yeah, I think so too.
The icing on the cake, very much so. I think it's looking really great now that there are consistent paths all around everything, and it's funny looking at it from the top-down view. You can see a broad overview of the texture, and the keen eye can pick out the details of stuff, but it looks for all the world like you've just kind of carved away an area of grass, and there's just the dirt underneath that's been left behind. And of course, a lot of that is coarse dirt, so it won't completely grow over to begin with. But it all just looks so natural and real that I think it's such a fun thing to see in that broad scope now. And a little bit of context of the stuff around it, I can see where that foundation is for your fishing house. And yeah, I think it's sitting so nicely in the landscape now with everything around it that it's going to be a really great background for the next couple of projects if that's what you're moving on to.
Thanks, man. Yeah, it's been nice to have the details come together. And I was a little concerned when I was looking at it from high up, taking some screenshots. But ultimately, you have to remember when you're looking at these things in an overview, when you're planning, that's not how they're designed to be viewed. Like I'm really wanting this to be something that you see on the ground as a player. And so if I thought, well, this is sort of looking a little bit repetitive, it's like, well, you can't see more than one row at a time when you're on the ground. Yeah. So really, as long as the row you're on doesn't feel like a checkerboard, then everything else is going to be fine. And so I had to like shelve the existing perfectionist that I keep with me at all times, which is both good for this kind of thing, but also a little anti-productive. Like you can be noodling away on something far too long when it's like, okay, not only is this like one of several, dozen rows in this farm, it's also at the back. Like, I don't know anybody that's going to go out the back gate and go like, you missed a spot, Joel. Like, just relax and just get it done to the point where it's going to feel good and then move on. So I'm trying not to think too hard about this kind of stuff. And I think that that's one of the things that I struggle with when doing any kind of like texture where I only have a couple of blocks that work. I've tried to work in other blocks, but it's difficult. And so I find that if I try too hard, I end up making a pattern despite the efforts. Whereas if I don't think about it too hard, then the patterns are less of a problem. And I don't have to go back and say, all right, well, I've put like 4 blocks that are very similar right next to each other. I need to move those. Whereas I feel like if I don't think about it too hard, I won't make patterns. And so that's what I've been trying to convey on my streams is like, look, if you can just like talk to friends and muscle through this and not think too hard about it, then it's really passable. You don't have to be perfect with everything on this scale for texture.
And it's really weird whenever you try and represent randomness, not you specifically, but whenever one tries to represent randomness in the game, you sort of forget that the actual outcome of randomness, if you flip a coin a bunch of times, it might come up heads or tails like 6, 7, 8 times in a row, but the human brain doesn't think like that. We sort of think there should be a more even distribution of stuff. And so if you're trying for pure randomness rather than just like what you think looks good, then you need to detach yourself from that analytical way of thinking for a while and just go for it and be happy with whatever results kind of end up being put down, because otherwise you end up with something that looks too planned, and again, the keen eye can tell when it looks too planned instead of looking a lot more natural and random. So it's a tricky line to walk, but yeah, I think it's interesting having like tried to get out of that perfectionist mindset, but still having an eye for the details is such a tricky balance. But you've got to remember that there are going to be some people, if they're visiting this area, who are just going to fly over the entire thing to get to whatever landmark they think interests them. Or there are going to be some people who want to explore everything on foot. Not less the fact that you've got it all on stream, so everyone who's going back and looking at all of your streams is going to see you exploring it all on foot. And so the chronicle of this area coming together is all from that on-the-ground perspective with a little bit of flying around and free cam sort of mixed in. So you've got to have an eye for all of those details, and that's, like I said, why the detail pass is so important on big builds like this.
And I do fly over it from time to time, but it's usually low and with a, I guess, motivation of just getting somewhere quickly to like get back to the keep, to get a block that I just forgot, and and save some time, even though I just walked it, backtracking, that kind of thing. Most of the time I walk if I can, because I think it's more engaging. But the flying thing, I don't generally fly super high above it with the idea of like taking in the view. It's usually like I need to get someplace quickly when I do that. So. But I appreciate that. It's going to be a lot of fun when it's all done. I think it's going to be fun to kind of be like, stick a knife in it and say like, all right, we're done. It's now visitor friendly. Everybody can come in and explore and have a good time. So hopefully that's coming up soon. We're getting there.
Yeah, one thing I will say is don't feel like you got to take everything for granted at that point. Like, I think it's still such a great endeavor and so many cool details in there that it feels tempting to fly over it to get to that one thing. But I do think walking through it really gives people some perspective on the amount of effort that's gone into this over the past few years.
Thank you. Speaking of effort, there's been more efforts on the Mojang front. We've got some news this week. Minecraft Java Edition Snapshot 25W08A was published last Wednesday. Spawn eggs just got cuter, with new textures looking more like the mobs they spawn. Wolves are becoming more unique with their own individual sounds. When a wolf spawns, it will get one of 7 personalities unrelated to their variant or biome. From cute to grumpy, each wolf will bark, growl, pant, whine, and express themselves in their own unique way. To top it all off, leaf litter will now look even better with new colors, and we've made some tweaks to what color of sheep spawns in different biomes. So some new features for Snapshot 2508A. Added new sound variants for wolves. There are 6 new wolf sounds variants: unique, ambient, hurt, death, growl, whine, and pant sounds. The new sounds are part of variants that are called big, cute, puglin, angry, grumpy, and sad. The original wolf sounds are now used for the variant called classic. Every wolf will have a random sound variant assigned to it for the 6 new variants and the original one. The sound variant is not related to the texture variant. Overhauled the visuals of each spawn egg in creative mode to improve readability and accessibility. Each spawn egg now has their own unique visual, which captures the personality and character of the mob it spawns. Each egg visually varies in shape to reflect the in-world size of the mob it spawns. For example, smaller mobs tend to have smaller spawn eggs. Adjusted sheep wool color in warm and cold biomes. Mojang has reverted the change from last week that allowed blue, light blue, cyan, yellow, orange, and red sheep to spawn naturally in different biomes. Black sheep will still be the most common type to spawn in cold biomes, and brown sheep will be the most common type to spawn in warm biomes. Pink sheep will still have a very rare chance to spawn. Uncommon sheep colors in cold biomes are gray, light gray, white, and brown. Uncommon sheep colors in warm biomes are gray, light gray, white, and black. Leaf litter is now tinted based on the biome in which it appears. Some changes in 25W08A. Sheep wool undercoat is now also colored when dyed, matching existing behavior in Bedrock Edition. Sheep can now eat fern blocks to match Bedrock Edition as well, and the Wandering Trader's buying trades can now be used twice before they lock instead of only once. Under technical changes, the data pack version is now 68, the resource pack version is now 53. Under data pack changes, biome effects have a new field, dry foliage color, that defines the color used for tinting blocks using dry foliage tinting. Wolf sound variants can now be data-driven. The file contains 6 fields, which correspond to the 6 new sounds wolves can make. Resource pack changes added possibility to tint blocks based on dry foliage color maps. Updated new textures for spawn eggs. New and updated sounds for wolf sound variants. Added color map texture for tinting dry foliage tinted blocks. The name of sheep fur texture has been renamed to sheep wool. Sheep now have a separate texture for their wool undercoat, which is dynamically recolored in-game. The name of this undercoat texture is sheep wool undercoat. New textures have been added for all spawn eggs, and the spawn egg PNG and spawn egg overlay PNG have been removed. Bug fixes of note in 25W08A. Wolf barking and whining sounds are subtitled as wolf pants. Shields can block some environmental damage sources. Death loot table field is incorrectly named Death Luth table. That's been fixed. For more details and more breakdown data on some of the data-driven changes in this week's snapshot, check out the Minecraft.net changelog linked in our show notes at thespawnchunks.com.
There's also a Minecraft Bedrock Edition beta and preview. This release is 1.21.70.24, was published on February 19th, and Bedrock Edition seems to have followed the same developments as Java Edition, so we won't discuss it in detail here, but we will leave a link in our show notes for anyone interested in the fine details of this preview release.
So Johnny, how do you feel about the new wolf sounds?
I think it's great to give dogs more personality. I think that's one of the things people love about dogs in the real world is the diversity of attitudes that they have. And I think simulating that in Minecraft in whatever ways you can is a great way of conceding more of that like reality to players whilst not being able to do much. We've talked about this ad nauseum in the past, but with the dog shapes and making them more similar to the sizes and feature changes that occur in dog breeds in real life. So yeah, I think it's kind of a shame that with more personality auditorily doesn't come more visual change, but it would also mean 6 visual changes for 8 wolf variants, meaning 48 overall additional wolves, more or less. I wonder if they could be layered over the wolf model in the same way that like villager professions or the different like panda variants can be. Because if you spawn a panda in creative mode from the same panda spawn egg, it sort of randomizes which version you get. So they're all technically the same mob, but with different aspects to them. Like the snotty panda or the panda with its tongue out or whatever. I wonder if they could do something similar with wolves, but it would mean doing that for, all of the different wolves in all of the different biomes. So a little bit of an undertaking. But either way, I think it's great that players can get attached to their dogs for different reasons now as well. If they've like tamed a wolf and have it around, it can be very different to a player who's tamed one of the same wolves. And I think that's a very, I don't want to say small change, but it's a subtle change that has massive consequences for players who like to interact with that side of the game.
Yeah, as a mostly endgame player that's not around wolves very much, it was a cool thing that I experienced when I first started Minecraft, but I really haven't gone back to it. So I didn't really see this. Like I didn't have this on my radar as things that were going to come, especially because we just got a lot of updates to wolves in the previous snapshots in the previous drop. I imagine it does help with the monotonous barking. So if you've got a dog that you have, like I made a little dog house outside my farmhouse, and that's where I kept the one dog that I had, just to kind of check that Minecraft box. Okay, I did that, I experienced that, and it does like help chase skeletons away and that kind of thing. But it was the same bark over and over again. I think you could probably say the same thing about the dog in Stardew Valley. It's very similar experience. So having it change its noises from time to time, it's probably a better player experience. I think it's a little bit more RP for people that want that as well. I am curious though, after you just mentioned like the layering of different wolf variants, and then now we've got different personality variants. I wonder if that opens up the doors for data pack authors, potentially mod authors, but more data pack authors to say, okay, well, if this is all data driven and we now have a random personality assigned to a wolf, if you tame that personality, would it then be easier to then assign your own model to a tamed wolf with like personality X? So like say the Puglin personality, you could say, okay, well, I want this to be a little dog. It's going to look like a pug. And then you pick another personality like the goofy one or the sad one, and maybe make that the golden retriever, or like whatever you want. And I'm curious if that's going to open up some creativity for data pack authors and mod authors.
Yeah, like I definitely imagine that there's ways resource pack makers can change the model and so forth, and like have that suit the personality. I think it's great to have that as a potential add-on for the game, as opposed to it being something that's in there by default for players who are just happy with the wolves that they find in the wild being, the thing that they get to tame. But yeah, people who want a bit more variation in wolves now have a ton more options. And considering that, like I said, it was something like 48 different categories, not even counting the classic wolf. If you want to create a resource pack that turns those into a bunch of different dog breeds from the real world, you've now got much more scope to do so than the single wolf that we had before, or the additional wolf variants that were added with armored paws. I think you have like free reign to create as many dog breeds as you want to, more or less, now.
With the sheep wool changes, I was fine with the way that they had it before. I wasn't a big fan of the changes in terms of like traveling to get new sheep colors, because you can just dye them. But that's because I'm an experienced player that knows that you can just dye them. But I thought that having the brighter colors, the cooler colors like blues and cyans and the chilly biomes made sense compared to having the warmer colors in hotter biomes. But they've dialed back the fantasy logic and just kind of went with something a little bit more realistic. But it did make me wonder, is there a way in game that Minecraft communicates that you can dye sheep? Is there an advancement for that I don't know about, where if you are just new to sheep, you find a sheep in the field, that it lets you know that you can dye it?
I don't think so, but I think the existence of different colors of sheep is maybe a hint at that, or the fact that there are different wool colors. You sort of experiment with like, well, if I get white wool and I dye that, like I think the dye recipes open up once you pick up a color of wool now, so it should be pretty easy to tell, oh, I can dye the wool. Logical leap, can I dye the sheep too? And maybe that's how you find out. But I think it's also such an old mechanic that it's pretty well documented, and unless you're somebody who plays Minecraft completely unspoiled, it's one of those things that intuitively you should know about from watching a handful of Minecraft videos. You just got to look at the sheep farm designs that anybody has in their world to see, oh, you have 16 colors of sheep. I presume I just use the 16 colors of dye on them, and that's pretty straightforward. I saw the logic in bringing colored sheep to the different biomes, but I also now see the logic in removing them. I think the logic a lot of players were preaching was just that they weren't natural wool colors, and any sheep that you've seen out in the world in the real world at least, with colorful wool, it's usually because they've been marked by farmers for various reasons, right? So it makes sense that that's something that requires player interaction for it to happen. I don't mind one way or the other whether this is like whether they decide to diversify the sheep colors or not, because like you, yeah, I know that it's possible to do that as a player, but I think it's interesting, after all of the variant animals for warm and cold biomes, they've decided to just keep the changes a little bit more subtle, and I think what players wanted, if anything, was a variant model change the way we got with chickens, cows, and pigs. But I guess if that's not within scope for the update, then they can at least skew it closer to player expectations for what to find in those biomes.
I do like the change where you can see what color the sheep is after you've sheared it. Like that to me makes a lot of sense, and it's more practical. When we had a manual sheep farm, which is just a bunch of pens outside of a barn in Dartmouth Meadows when we all first started playing, and one of the difficulties was trying to explain to people where this certain sheep color was, because we didn't want to have signs everywhere. And if you went in and you needed a lot of black wool and you sheared all of the black sheep, well, then you didn't know which one was the black pen for the sheep, because like you kind of had to go from process of elimination, provided that there was other pens available. So that to me was a nice change. It looks a little bit funny. I think what happens now, like when I see the sheep, especially the sheared sheep, I really feel like the models look dated, and they don't look like sheep to me compared to like the new cows and the new chickens that they just updated, and then now the wolf variants we were just talking about. I really feel like the sheep look like they're out of place. They don't look like the kind of animal that you'd expect. They communicate the game mechanics a little bit better, but that's about it. Speaking of, Dan Grice in our chat, as well as Tarvo Sly, mentioned that there is a Bedrock achievement called the Rainbow Collection in Bedrock to dyeing all 16 colors of wool.
Right.
So, or collecting all 16 colors of wool. So at least there's a hint there that you can get different wool types. I don't think there's anything specifically about the achievement that sounds like you can dye sheep, but it kind of is a hint there that you can do it. But nothing so far that I know in Java.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I do like the fact that we've now got the Bedrock functionality of there being patches of wool left on the colored sheep. And not only that, if you name tag a sheep with the Jeb Easter egg that makes it a rainbow, like rotating through all of the different colors, the patchy wool left on the sheep after it's been sheared still does that if you have a name tagged sheep. So
nice.
I think that's a fun addition to that, and it seems to just take whatever wool color the sheep naturally has and kind of embeds that in the sheep model. So I think you might even be able to re-dye sheep once they've been sheared, but I don't know that for certain. I don't think that was possible previously in Java editions, so that's something to check on as a gameplay, like, quality of life thing as well.
It wasn't. I remember that frustration when I wanted to move some sheep over, like I had too many white sheep or too many of this kind of sheep, and you wanted to kind of transfer them from pen to pen, but you couldn't dye them until they grew their wool, so you kind of wait. So you had to go do something else and then come back and wait for everybody to have their wool again.
The other change that's worth pointing out in here is the leaf litter biome tint, and we now have all the changes I wanted from leaf litter, which is amazing. It's compostable, it's biome tinted, it's placeable on any block. For me, this feature has gone from good to perfect, basically, or almost perfect. I still think I might reduce how much it generates in forests, but that's something that the player can change very easily. You just got to tip a bucket of water all over the ground to clean up all of the leaf litter, and then you can bone meal the ground a couple of times. But it does kind of reduce the amount of short grass that generates in some of those forests, and I think it's more realistic for wild forests to have a bunch of grass growing everywhere, along with the leaf litter sort of all over the ground. In an ideal world, and I know this isn't possible because of the way blocks work in Minecraft, but you could have effectively leaf-logged blocks that would work where there was a combination of leaf litter and short grass on a block, because there's always going to be a mix of everything within a cubic meter of forest terrain. There's going to be all kinds of different stuff, but yeah, naturally I don't think that's going to happen anytime, so I think would be nice to have a little bit more grass mixed into natural generation in forests again.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that would be a better balance. Whenever I've seen the leaf litter in game, it just feels like it's everywhere, which is probably accurate to what's happening in the real world in terms of how many leaves are on the ground in a forest. But I think what we see is, like you said, grass and other things growing up in between the leaves, where in Minecraft, you have to dedicate that surface to just that one thing. And I don't think that there's enough, either, like you said, short grass, or just enough grass blocks being left exposed. Like, I feel like that there could be something maybe with the spawning pattern of leaf litter to have it maybe closer to trees, and then as you get farther away from trees, maybe have less of it. That could make a little bit more sense and look like less of a carpet and more of like an intentional leaves falling on the ground sort of idea. I think also that the leaf litter tint is consistent with how most leaf blocks work in Minecraft. I know there are some exceptions that don't change color from biome to biome, but specifically when you go into like a dry biome, like Badlands or deserts, I think having the leaf litter desaturate and look really crunchy is going to be a nice way to combine with other textures. I'm really looking forward actually to doing some texture work with leaf litter in like a brown biome or something like a desert, where it's going to be a complete color shift from a lot of the greens that I've been working with forever in West Hill. I think it's going to be a lot of fun to try to get in some different colors and stuff. And I want to give a quick shout out to Jumbo Sale, a content engineer member of our community, who wrote in with a longer email that we can't fit in today. But the idea was talking about leaf litter aging like copper as an idea to get a little bit more out of it. And I thought that was another interesting way to combat the brown carpet vibe that we're talking about in the forests, where the older a leaf is, the more brown it was. The email essentially was like green or dark green when it first hits the ground, something like a red or an orange as it gets older, and then more of that dead leaf brown as it gets to the end. And I don't know how that would work in terms of the new biome tints, I would imagine it would be the same way that existing leaves work, in that the browns and the yellows in the middle would be less saturated in something like a desert. But then if it was in a flower forest, maybe they would be very bright, and that could be very cool. I think the only issue, of course, there is that you'd have leaves on the ground that had different colors, but then no leaves on the trees that went through that same change, right? And I think that might be kind of a weird inconsistency in the game.
Yeah, but still something to think about, especially as they try and add more ambience and life and more of this sort of natural ecosystem to the world. I think it's fun to come up with these ideas. And we're going to discuss a couple more ideas today as we get into chunk mail. As usual, if you'd like to email the show, the email address is spawnchunkmail@gmail.com. Please keep your emails short and to the point. It helps us include them in the show more easily. This one comes from T-Scaz with the subject of waxing cows. Hi, Johnny and Joel. During episode 335, Joel was talking about the aesthetics of having baby cows, and he wished there was a way to keep them as babies. Johnny referred to this as waxing cows. I think Mojang could do this relatively easily. We have baby zombies that don't grow into adults. We also have the mechanic where if we use a name tag on an NPC, it doesn't despawn. I think they could make it so that when you name tag an entity, not only do they not despawn, but they stop aging, effectively stopping their 20-minute timer to adulthood. This would lead to a myriad of cute, funny NPCs running around with only an aesthetic value and no real in-game function, i.e. baby villagers that don't age and can never trade, or baby highland cows that don't drop meat or leather, etc. The only detractor I see is that there is no effective way to wax off once you wax on a non-adult entity. Thanks to both of you for a very informative and entertaining weekly Minecraft discussion. T-Scaz died from being hit by a meteor on his very first night of his very first time playing Minecraft. Yes, this actually happened while playing Texit 1.7 mod pack.
That is a heck of a way to go. I mean, it's and like if you're gonna kick it, then like at least it's quick. Like you're not you might see it coming, you might not. That just could be the end right there. Hopefully it wasn't a hardcore world. Although I guess if it was your first night, then you really didn't lose too much.
Yeah, and fair play for your very first time playing Minecraft being an old mod pack like that. That's, I presume, a while ago, but still, yeah, something of a shocking way to get introduced to the game. But as for the body of this email, I think genuinely a great way to expand and sort of build on name tag functionality. It feels like there is precedent for this after a fashion with it preventing these mobs from despawning, so why not keep them as they are? I think this makes a lot of sense. I wanted to tag onto the idea that there isn't a way to remove the effect from name tagging something in this way. What if you use a blank name tag to do that and it removes the name that they had previously? Maybe even puts the name back onto a blank name tag so that you could reuse it instead of consuming an item again. I think it'd be great to have a way of doing that, and it would also add more value to name tags, which have obviously been in the game for a while and are still used quite heavily. But something like this, if they're planning on implementing a way to keep animals or whatever creatures that size, I think this would be a pretty good one. What do you think, Joel?
We've got a couple of data packs on the Citadel that are very handy. One of them is crafting name tags, and the other one is a silence name tag that will stop a mob from making noise. So a good example would be the zombie that you might have in your iron farm, intimidating the villagers. If that iron farm is very close to you, where you play a lot and you have to listen to that zombie moan all the time, you can shut them up. Same thing with zombified piglins. If you've got them in like your nether hub or different places like that, you can quiet the mob. And I think that that's a really neat idea for a data pack. And you can do the same thing here. Like there might be an opportunity for a data pack to keep baby animals from growing up. I would imagine if you can control the sound, you may also be able to control their growth clock, which I think was like a 20-minute cycle that they mentioned in the email. I mean, I think it's a great idea. I think that you have to then, or feel at least obliged to name the baby animals something cute like teeny weeny small cow or Timbit. Like I think that that's
Yeah.
kind of an obligation at that point to bring them in. But one of the things here is that obviously this is meant to be building on something that I mentioned about having baby animals aesthetically around on your farm, in the field, maybe in the barn, that kind of thing. But it made me wonder if there could be a way to get other animals as tamed pets, like a wolf or a cat, becomes the dog or the cat that will follow you around. And Obviously, you'd want to be able to differentiate between the two because you wouldn't necessarily want the cow to follow you around all the time if you wanted it in the field. But it would be very cool to have a baby cow as a pet for some people, I'm sure, or a chicken, or a pig. Like, I think that would be fun for people that might want to RP. And I'm wondering if, again, your name tag idea, expanding the idea for name tags for farm animals, if by naming them a certain thing, or for maybe with farm animals, like if you put a collar on them or did something with them to then tame them, feed them something specific in a combination. I don't know what it could be to get them. Like a collar on a cow would indicate, oh, that's the cow that's going to follow you around. The cow in the field is just going to be in the field like a normal cow would. But I thought that was an interesting idea that kind of popped in my head after this email.
I like the idea of also being able to keep baby turtles that size, because the difference between an adult turtle and a baby turtle is huge, and you can imagine keeping the baby turtles as like terrapins or any of the I'm not sure what the general category is for like turtles, tortoises, whatever, but like the ones that you can keep in like fish tank size environments, where you really don't feel like you can do that with Minecraft turtles because they're so big, they take up a lot of space compared to like tropical fish that are usually pretty small. And having a turtle that you could treat as like an aquatic creature in there, it would have to stay the small size. So I think it'd be really nice to have a way of freezing those animals in that state. I do wonder if this can be done with data packs already. I think it's entirely possible that it could, but I like the idea of it being vanilla functionality. The only downside I see to it is maybe for newer players who don't understand the sort of intuitive nature of the way name tags are used yet. Name tagging something in the hope that it will grow up and then it'll stay the same thing forever, and you're like, your first like kitten that you get, you name tag it immediately thinking, oh, this is going to be this cat that's going to grow up and be like the other cats that you have around. And then when that one didn't ever grow up, you might be confused about what's happened to it. But I think that's something that would teach the player maybe that was the effect name tags had, and then you'd be able to understand that better going forward. So I think it's perfectly reasonable to have that as vanilla functionality.
I mean, you could just name it something like Destroyer of Grass and then keep it small for comedic value.
Sure.
That would either be disappointing or it would be hilarious in its own right. But we have to see what other people come up with. Our next email comes in from Supera Jokera. Possible additions to snowy biomes. Dear Joel and Johnny, with the latest snapshots continuing to add more and more new ambient features to deserts, it makes me wonder if biomes such as snowy plains or the ice bikes biome will be getting similar treatment later in the cycle. I think given how technically the last ambience feature to be added to these biomes was polar bears back in 1.10, structures and music aside, these biomes feel in need of a little love and attention. I wanted to ask if you felt the same way about snowy biomes, and if so, what features would you like to see added to them to enhance their ambience? I'd personally love to see features like snow logging grass and flowers come over from the Bedrock Edition, as well as getting snow layers to spawn under trees so that these biomes aren't broken up as much by the minty green grass. Sincerely, Supera Jokera. Really cool username. I had to read it a couple times before the show. I'm just like, I think that's like a rhyming username. It's great.
Mm-hmm. I think snow plains are one of the more neglected biomes in Minecraft. They're one of the least built in by players, as well as having fewer features present in them. And I think it's mainly because of the snow settling on anything you build. I think that's primarily the issue for players building there. And I think doubly so now that we have less control over rain, because the rain cycle no longer completely resets whenever you sleep in a bed. It can get rid of rain, but it doesn't mean that it delays the next rainfall, which it used to. And so I think that might be part of the reason that Mojang hasn't given more love to snow plains, although obviously they're meant to be kind of desolate places to begin with. So, polar bears, Arctic foxes, snowy villages. There's not really a whole lot else that you can imagine natively being there, because those are fairly uninhabited places in our world, and you don't really have a great deal of like animals and so forth and unique plants there. So I think it's a double-edged sword, really, because it's sort of a similar way to how they haven't really spent much time updating the end, because the end is meant to be a desolate moon-like landscape, and also statistics show that a lot of players don't ever bother to go there, either because they're intimidated by the Ender Dragon fight, or that there's not really anything there for them. They see the overworld as like rich enough in its gameplay and its materials and everything to sustain what they want to do with Minecraft. So I'm kind of curious if we end up with some additions to Snow Plains, if that drives people to the biome, or if it feels like wasted effort because people don't willingly go to those biomes all that often.
Yeah, I was thinking about ways to try and spruce up these biomes, but not overdo it, so that, like you said, they still feel like what their intention is supposed to be. And my thought was to bring in some existing gameplay, which again, they haven't done much more with since they've added it, and that is ancient seeds. So if you took a sniffer to one of these snowy biomes and you were able to dig up like a new fantasy frozen type of ancient seed, I think that would be really fun. You wouldn't have to worry about it being realistic. You don't have to worry about it encroaching on the existing landscape. You have to bring a sniffer there to get it. And then you could have something like frosted bells, or something like a snowdrop, which is a real life flower, but they're little and they're white. And you could take either one of these into like a 2x tall flower, really give it some unique features. I mean, icicles hanging off of a bluebell type plant would be kind of cool looking. Anything that would help with adding new colors, because like the pitcher plant's kind of purple when it's done. The torch flower has got a lot of oranges and reds in it. So going with some of the cooler colors like greens and blues and cyans would be kind of cool. I was careful not to like get too inspired by something like the lily of the valley, which is a short flower, but still the kind of thing that I would expect to see in a snowy plains that would match the environment, but we already have that. And I was thinking more of the 2x tall flowers, because like we don't need more flowers giving us more dye colors. I think we've kind of got all that covered. But I thought that would be a good way to kind of incorporate gameplay into the additions in the biome, as opposed to just having something crop up. But I did think that something would be cool, like ice chunks or icicles. We've got hanging roots that happen in certain areas now. We've got lush caves that have glowberries and vines that hang from the ceiling, spore blossoms, that kind of thing. And again, a lot of those are more the warm colors. Even the hanging roots are a little bit more warm. I guess hanging moss, or pale hanging moss, is now a much cooler color than other things. But having something like icicles or ice chunks kind of hanging underneath some of those blocks that stick out in like something specific, like the ice spikes biome, I think that would be really cool. You can collect them. You can hang them on the eaves of your snowy build, underneath the parapets of castles in a snowy area. They'd be great for decoration, but it would also be really cool if you could use them for some sort of mobility. Like I was thinking, like, what could you use icicles for? And I don't know whether you could just craft them into a weapon, or you could maybe put them on your boots, or craft them into boots or into a potion or something to give you maybe like that slidey ice feeling that you get on ice, but on other blocks. And we talked a few weeks ago about like traversal and like roller skates. Well, what if it wasn't roller skates? What if it was magical? Like what if your new enchantment on your boots allow you to basically like put ice down like Frozone from Incredibles and move around a lot faster? Think about traversing a lava lake in the Nether if you've gone to travel to an ice spikes biome, which is pretty rare in the overworld, and discovered that, oh wow, like I can actually have boots now that allow me to skate across lava lakes. Like I just think it would be kind of fun for end game, or rewarding players for like that exploration to find that rare stuff.
When you were talking about that for a second, I went, do you mean Frostwalker? But then you said lava lakes, and I went, oh, okay, like we're talking like an expansion to that and something like a little extra. Yeah. No, I think it'd be fun to have more stuff to go to ice spikes for, especially now. I think a lot of people just substitute frozen oceans for ice spikes when it comes to finding like large quantities of packed ice. And even blue ice is present in frozen oceans, which isn't in ice spikes biomes. So I think there's more like expansion room to be had there for sure. I think based on the ambient sounds that they've added to deserts, you could very easily get a similar Arctic wind sound effect into snowy environments, just based on the amount of snow layers that are present in the area, or perhaps packed ice blocks if you wanted something unique to an ice spikes biome. I think anywhere that players build with snow layers, they are more likely trying to produce a similar kind of environment anyway, at least as far as my activity goes. That's the only thing I've ever really done with snow layers that weren't retextured to look like sand or something like that. So I think you could very easily put some more ambient sound into the environment. Whether that would encourage players to play there is another matter entirely. But other things I thought of, they're sort of more passive features, but something that would just add a bit more visual variety to the region. What if there were boulders formed by glacier activity? I find that a lot of the environments in the natural world, there are almost like megalithic kind of style boulders placed around, just formed over centuries. And while mountains themselves aren't necessarily unique to those cold biomes, and cold mountains can pop up in a variety of other places, not necessarily linked to a snowy tundra, I like the idea of there being more kind of boulders around, as though the area has been eroded and worn down over the ages and left behind a lot of untouched rock and stone. Also, looking up Arctic tundra on a Google image search, I was surprised by how much color variety there is in the native plants. And in Minecraft, obviously, it's overwhelmingly this kind of blue-tinted grass. But in real life, there are a lot of other plants there. There's a lot of, like, Lowe's kind of scrub plants, anything that's able to survive in that either permafrost kind of, like, permanently frozen soil or just, like, an environment that gets cold through the majority of the year. In real life, there's a lot of red and yellow in those plants. And I wonder if maybe when they're thinking about adding new things like the bushes that they've just been added to the, natural biomes in Minecraft, if something like cold biomes could occasionally get little like gorse plants or heather or something that adds a bit more color, and maybe considers, even though it's not a warm environment, adding in some things that are of warmer color just to make the environment feel a little different. I think that the ones that I found, the photos I found, may be seasonal photos, so they may not necessarily be as present when there's like snow and ice covering everything, but I think it's really interesting to see that the natural world has that level of diversity and doesn't necessarily, skew too much towards these kind of warm and cool colors as we think of them in our kind of color theory.
Something that just dawned on me talking about seasonal stuff and the plants that are available. The Canadian in me would like to see something like an elk or a caribou walking around. I mean, I don't know what it could be used for other than the things that we already use animals for in Minecraft, but it would be neat to have that kind of thing in some of the biomes, maybe not all of them. I can't see it in an ice spikes, but like something like a snowy plains, that would make a lot of sense.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of room for expansion in snow plains in general, so I think there's a lot of great ideas there. Shall we move on to our main topic, though, because I'm sure people have been dying to hear us talk about the new spawn egg textures.
That sounds like a plan. And what I thought we could do is just kind of take a look at the new spawn eggs, share our initial thoughts in terms of like design clarity, accessibility that they mentioned. And some of these are just fun. I think it's worth noting that some of these are just meant to be a good nod to a history in the game and recognizable quirks that these mobs have. And I think some of them are really, really fun. Where do you want to kick off?
Well, I think in terms of general thoughts about this, I think it's a really great idea. I think it's got to the point now with especially recent mob additions, but also thinking about all of the different variants and the potential that there is to include different spawn eggs for variants of these different animals. Like the chickens have their own split up eggs that they lay in game, but they don't have individual spawn eggs. When you're spawning in a chicken from a spawn egg, it's usually just whichever biome you generate it in is the rules that are applied to it. But in case they wanted to add spawn eggs for the cold chicken and the warm chicken specifically, it's a lot easier to do that now that the designs have been split up to better resemble the animals rather than just being an egg with different color spots, and the colors are the things that you're supposed to recognize in whatever mob it is you're trying to pick out, because like that would limit the color palette that they want to use for any new mobs they add or any variants. So I think it's high time that something like this got changed up. Also, I think in terms of accessibility, with a few exceptions here and there, so many of these have recognizable silhouettes, recognizable features of the mob that they are representative of. There are so many that are recognizable without needing like fully accurate color vision, and I think that's brilliant. I think that totally makes sense. And while you could hover over everything in the creative inventory and it was all alphabetized if you're searching for it, so you could clearly tell roughly where you were supposed to find one of these, it's so much easier to just look and go like, oh, that's clearly the egg that spawns a creeper or a goat or anything like that, and you don't mistake those for the eggs that spawn a slime or a zombie or any of the other kind of like a polar bear or something like that, right? You don't need to worry too much about a limited color palette anymore, and I think that's great.
I agree with all of that. I think it's all a really positive change. It was not on my bingo card of things that I thought we were going to get. They did mention a while ago that they were going to revisit some of the Minecraft UI and some of the icons for accessibility and readability. I think it was Brandon that mentioned that. But my survival brain was thinking about the kind of things that you and I would deal with on a day-to-day basis in playing survival Minecraft. I just was not thinking about spawn eggs, and I think this is a great change. Some of these changes remind me of a comment that I've made a number of times recently, which is that I wish that Minecraft would update things visually to feel a little bit more like a modern game. This does that. This is a really good example of taking these older graphics, these older simple sprites, and bringing them up to snuff with what I feel are more modern pixel art games. A really good one that I like to cite is Core Keeper. The sprites in Core Keeper are really fun, really clear, really unique. They really do let you know what you're going to get, or even have a bit of whimsy around them where you're like, okay, well, I see what that is, but also that's pretty clever how they designed that, to fit in this little box or to put it all into one little sprite. And I think that they've done a really good job on a lot of these, as you mentioned, for both the clarity, but also the whimsy and bringing it up to modern standards, having a little bit more personality. I think is really great. The featured article that we mentioned earlier, that the spawn eggs are displayed in, they have them a lot in item frames. And it really it's disappointing that you can't get these in survival. I mean, you could probably with a data pack, right? Like you could probably find a way to do it with a data pack, maybe renaming existing eggs, the natural chicken egg or something like that. You could find a way to do it because in some of them, it would be a really useful way to maybe label chests or label areas of your storage because they are flat sprites. They're not the same as like when you put like a block in an item frame, it kind of has a 3D model and it sticks out. These kind of stick flat to the wall like a pickaxe would or like any of those other flat inventory sprites do. And I really think some of these could be quite useful. I would want to put them like near shulker boxes that have, like bamboo or different levels of jungle stuff in them. Could be used with the panda, sprite for the spawn egg. Like there's a bunch of different things I can think of that could be very fun. And it is quirky in a way, like with everything being an egg. Like I think that they could have just used symbols. Like they could have changed it from a spawn egg to a spawn symbol or a spawn icon. But they didn't. They decided to just keep them all as eggs. And I think that that's both challenging from a design perspective, but also just really whimsical.
Yeah, totally. Like I absolutely wish that these were available in survival now. We talked about collecting all the wool colors earlier. Collecting all of the spawn eggs would be really fun, but for obvious reasons, it's unlikely to happen. And like, even if you wanted to do something in creative mode, if you're like a parent who wants to set up an Easter egg hunt, we talked about doing that for the new chicken eggs now that there are 3 of those, but these are definitely going to give parents some fun activities to set up in Minecraft for their kids around like Easter time, as long as the kids have enough self-control not to use the creeper egg in the middle of the challenge. I'm personally, in a more general sense here, hoping that this paves the way for the other stuff you were talking about, King B-Dog's mentioning when he was on the show, a sprite update for highly requested features, potions, enchanted books, things like that. Because it seems like the art team has, I think in 90 to 95% of these, absolutely knocked it out of the park. Like, I think a lot of these are instantly recognizable as the mob you want. Like, the designs are there, the colors are there. And I also like the fact that some of the eggs are larger because the mobs are larger. I think that's kind of a smart move to make them feel more intuitive and maybe stand out. If there are smaller designs, you can kind of tell, oh, that's meant to be a silverfish because it's smaller than the other eggs that might look similar to it. Fortunately, though, the silverfish egg does stand out because it's got all of the kind of wispy bits around the outside of the egg. So they are clearly able to augment the designs a little bit. They're not keeping everything within the boundary of that egg shape. In some cases for the better, in some cases for the worse. So why don't we get into what our favorites are, and then maybe we'll give a little bit of constructive feedback after that.
So as a designer and artist, I poached a few of these, and
All
I
right.
think that they.
All right, it started. We're already here, are we? Okay. I see how it goes. Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, I feel like these really nailed the designs aesthetically and communicate the mob well. And surprisingly, the zombie, the drowned, and the bogged, I think really get some points for me for being subtle, but very clear. I mean, you're not necessarily going to get the feedback from someone that's not playing Minecraft, but as a Minecraft player, you're still going to know that's a zombie egg, that's a drowned egg, and that's a bogged egg. I think they did a really good job on those ones. I think the goat, the bee, the parrot, the panda, bat, allay, and axolotl have fantastic silhouettes.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's a combination of color and shape in all of those. Specifically, things like the little wings on the bat are very funny. Reminds me of one of the bats from like the Warner Brothers Looney Tunes shorts when I was a kid. The goat is very distinct, obviously. And the parrot, the colors on the parrot and the two little feathers on top, like just really, really sell it. There's no mistaking what these are. And these are things that I think people could see these and know what animal they represent, even if they've never laid eyes on Minecraft before. Like I think you immediately know what they are. And the ones that get some points for being really unique and stand out for me are the shulker, the strider, and the sniffer, and the snow golem. Those are really going outside of the box. They're also going outside of the egg shape, for example, to bring them into like a clear design that I think really communicates it. To go back to what you were saying, I was surprised actually that the strider egg is so large. I don't think of those as large mobs, but it's almost the same size as the creaking egg, which again is really cool. And those are my favorites. Strider, snow golem, creaking, breeze, and the fox. The fox is just super cute, really concise. The breeze gets points for me for being really minimalistic. Like you still know exactly what it is with like very little going on. And then of course the strider and snow golem and the creaking really kind of set themselves out as like these are just super unique mobs, but they're also super unique designs with a lot of fun. And I like the curlicues on the creaking. I think that's really fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like I think for me, for overall cuteness, the fox egg and the goat egg are my favorites. I think those both absolutely work. I almost wish they were available as like masks that a player could wear or something like that. You could imagine like playing some sort of animal dress up kind of situation with some of these, especially. Even the panda, like you put the panda on as like a mask, and I think that works pretty well. I think it's because they don't have eyes. Like none of the designs have eyes, which is something we'll get onto in a second, because I think in some cases it leads to some of these designs being less recognizable. But I do think some of these would fit really well as like some kind of, I don't know, festival garb of some kind. I think honorable mention goes to the cat egg, and I think it's really cool that they chose the jelly cat design for that one, not just because it's Good Times with Scars, now sadly departed cat, but also just the one that won the community vote in the first place, so it kind of represents the community's idea of what cat designs should be, and is distinct enough from the ocelot that I think they stand out really nicely. Obviously, the cat having that sort of triangular white patch next to the ocelot being like the more kind of speckled brown on yellow kind of design really sets the two apart from each other. So even if you have difficulties with color vision, I think it's perfectly fine separating those two. Yeah, like I think the panda egg is one of the funniest ones. It's hilarious to me that while it's still an egg shape, it's so similar to the panda's face, and the fact that they've managed to add ears onto some of these eggs, it does just look like a small model of a panda. Like that's one of the ones that goes outside of the egg shape idea. I think the ones that skew strongest that way also are the piglin ones, and to an extent the hoglin and the zoglin, because while you can still see the sort of pear-shaped, egg-shaped silhouette in there, they have so many extra like adornments to them. They have the floppy ears, they have the tusks coming up from the bottom, and that manages to break up the line of the egg silhouette to the point where they don't really look like eggs at all, even if they're still roughly that shape where you'd superimpose the outline over it. So I think those are interesting in that they stand out from the designs of the others so well, although perhaps not from each other. Again, something we'll get into in a second. For me, the funniest ones, though, I agree the snow golem is fantastic. I like the fact that the pumpkin is basically smushed down on top of it as though it's just been sat on. I like the witch very much. It's got the strong unibrow, it's got the big nose, it's got the hat. Like, it absolutely screams witch as soon as you see it. And then you spawn one in, and it screams at you. I agree the breeze is great because of the brows, and I'm also spelling brows with a Z. And finally, the Ravager. I think the Ravager looks like so recognizable from this, both in terms of like the pixel art, like the colors that they've chosen and the designs they've chosen, and also again big nose, unibrow, but the ears on top of that. And yeah, I think that's my favorite of the Pillager set, but I think the Witch is a very, very close second.
So for me, I think all of the villagers are pretty funny, as well as the pillagers and the witch. This is going to date me a little bit, but does anybody remember Bruno the Trash Man from Sesame Street?
I definitely do. Yep.
Yeah, is the Muppet suit that would carry around Oscar the Grouch in the garbage can. So
yes.
the puppeteer would have one hand in Oscar, and then the other hand would be like in Bruno's hand, and then of course in the head. And he didn't have eyes. His hat came right down to the bridge of his nose, and he had these huge bushy eyebrows. And that's what the villagers, pillagers, and the witch look like to me, is that they just have this straight, like, unibrow thing going right across. And there's a weird mix between that and, of course, some of the footage I've seen from recent trailers of a Minecraft movie where you get to see what these villagers look like with their unibrow, and it's very Muppet-like. And so I just immediately went to Bruno the Trash Man from Sesame Street, and I think they look ridiculous, but in the best way. I still think they are very strongly villagers. Like, you don't mistake them for anything else. I think the pillager eyebrows being triangles and the villager eyebrows being a rectangle really make a lot of sense. The nose is really what makes you say, okay, well, that's definitely a villager or a pillager. The other one, like for me, was the snow golem. The snow golem, I chuckled when I saw it online. Like, I definitely had a good laugh over that one. Some of them are more whimsical, but not necessarily as funny. Like, I like some of the cleverness, I guess, in things like the Guardian and the Elder Guardian. The Allay obviously is a pretty solid take, and then like basically the Vex is just like an angry version of the Allay egg. Like, it's the exact same silhouette, just the colors are different, and it has frowny face, and that's it. You know, and I think that they did a really solid job there. I also did find that the Sniffer egg pretty funny. Like, it's got like a hat of leaves, which I think is kind of interesting and distinctive. But yeah, those are my top funny ones. I do find the villager ones quite good, and the snow golem, I think, is just it might be my favorite. I think it might be my favorite.
I think the Warden is also a really good one, not necessarily on the funny side, but definitely like on the recognizable silhouette kind of side, and the fact that they've got the highlights of the Warden tendrils in there when it hears you. They've got that very bright kind of cyan color mixed in there. Like, so many of these are so great and distinct that I think as we move on to the constructive feedback portion of this, there are definitely a few that we think they should take another crack at. And yes, I'm doing it now. Get used to it. So, like I was saying, the design brief seems to have been, don't give anything eyes. And I get it, but it does lead to some of these designs being less recognizable. Specifically for me, it's the skeletons. I think the skeleton designs, with a skeleton included, but the stray especially, and I think even the regular skeleton, they don't have a strong enough resemblance to the face that we're used to, like the kind of iconic skeleton face, that it feels like they kind of missed the mark. And I think it's mainly because they've tried to avoid giving any of these eggs distinctive eyes. Would you agree, Joel?
Yeah, I think that when you get into the features that really define what is recognizable about something, then you have to break the rule. And I think a really good example of this is that even though the panda doesn't have eyes, it has patches around its eyes. And that, to me, like, it almost looks like a skull right there. Like, if you wanted to go like a super cartoony friendly skull, the panda kind of fits the bill. And so my first like list of things that need help were the skeleton, wither, stray, skeleton horse. Like, none of them really scream to me as skeletons. I can see what they tried to do. They tried to tilt the head down and have the eyes way down at the bottom, which I guess you could sort of do. But I think that the creeper egg is a good example of something really working well. And if you decided to not have the eyes on that, then you're just not going to be able to discern that really much as a creeper, because that's that's iconic. It's part of the Mojang logo, if I'm not mistaken. So
Yeah.
when it comes to these, like, I really feel like you could just go straight at these and have the eye sockets. Now, you could, to keep with the minimalist design brief, skip the nose hole. I feel like if you gave me two eye sockets that looked like, eye sockets on the skeleton, wither skeleton, even the wither, I think that I would be on board. I think what they did with the wither egg, they went more with like the rib cage, similar to what they did to your note earlier about the warden, but the warden has more distinctive high contrast stuff going on, whereas there's not a lot of contrast in skeletons, wither skeletons, the wither itself, the skeletal horse. There's not enough contrast there. I think the skeletal horse, they try to do the nose holes, but depending on who you are, it kind of looks like eyes or eyebrows because of how they've used eyebrows in other eggs. So yeah, I feel like the lowest on the totem pole for me are definitely the skeleton family of spawn eggs.
Yeah, I think the skeleton horse looking so different to the other horses is throwing me off. I think I looked at a screenshot of these where they were all arranged in alphabetical order, and I've tried to group them for the screenshot that I'll share in the video version of the show and we'll have in the show notes. I've tried to group them more by category and by variant, so you can sort of see where they subgroup together. And you see the horse, the donkey, the mule, and then the skeleton horse doesn't have as distinctive of a snout, and it doesn't have the ears or the hair on the top, which, of course, skeleton horses don't in the game, so it kind of makes sense. But I think that's where they need to break with the convention of the spawn egg looking exactly like the in-game mob for the sake of consistency within a group of animals, if that makes sense. Like, I would have a much more of an easy time recognizing that was a skeleton horse if you gave it skeletal ears, even if the horses in-game don't have skeletal ears. You know what I mean? Like, I think that would be a lot more clear if they did stuff like that. The ghast, I find, also doesn't have a strong enough face. They've sort of given us the screwed-up face version of the ghast, when, of course, when it opens its eyes, it's usually fireballing you. But that's the one that looks kind of like a rib cage to me. But, yeah, I don't really see that being as distinctive. I've sort of picked it out based on process of elimination more than just knowing immediately what that was, because they haven't included any of the fireball nature of the ghast. I think, if anything, just giving it an open screaming mouth would help, even if you don't have it open its eyes, and I think that one's going to be a lot better by that. I think likewise the lack of eyes hurts the spider eggs just a little bit, even though they are recognizable, especially if you place them side by side. You can tell the distinctive colors between the spider and the cave spider. The cave spider egg is even ever so slightly smaller. It's like a couple of pixels shorter. I think the fact that they don't have red eyes makes them look less like spiders to me. I don't think they are confused with any other kind of egg here. I just think it doesn't immediately say spider to me at first glance because they haven't painted the eyes on there. And I don't know if that's something that they could make an exception for with spiders, because spiders' eyes don't look the same as other creatures' eyes typically anyway. But I think maybe that's what's missing for me from those designs. And as far as that goes, like, we're into sort of nitpick territory here now. I think there are a couple of these, like the distinction between piglin and piglin brutes could be slightly more emphatic. Like, the piglin brute could perhaps look a little bit more scarred. I think they've got some subtle changes in the way they're shaded, and obviously the outfit below is slightly different, but they were talking about 2 pixels worth of height there, so it's very difficult to feel the details there. But they're not as distinct as, like, a hoglin to a zoglin, where it's very clearly a swap in color palette and the zombified nature of it with the green and the skull poking out. Those two is very easy to tell the difference between, whereas with piglins and piglin brutes, they're obviously fairly similar in game, so they're limited in how different they can make the spawn eggs. But I wonder if they are too similar. Maybe the same is true of the Vindicator, Evoker, and Pillager as well. But I think those have a distinct enough color palette change in their outfit that you can just about make out the difference between those.
Yeah, I think the color shape in the Vindicator and Evoker and stuff is a good kind of differentiator between them. And I agree. I think that the Nether mobs in general are on the weaker side. And I actually thought that Hoglins and Zoglins were Piglins and Zombified Piglins until I saw the Zombified Piglins and Piglins. And
Yeah.
one of the things I think they could do with the Piglin and Piglin Brute is if they gave the Piglin smaller tusks. I know we're dealing with 4 or 5 pixels here, maybe even 3, but I feel like just having even 1 pixel tusks, the color would be, I think, enough to indicate that they're tusks, and it would definitely help separate the beefier brutes from the regular sized piglins. And I know what you're saying about like the egg shape is still there, but it's also, there's enough happening to the silhouette here that it starts to not feel like an egg shape and just kind of feels like a mob head, which is weird, especially with the Hoglin and the Zoglin. I feel like because the Minecraft mobs are so boxy when you get into that larger scale, that it's worth taking some of that down into the spawn egg to kind of help you out there. I don't necessarily think they need to change the shape of the egg into a box, but I think that in a lot of cases the snouts could be changed. So same thing with the piglins and the piglins brutes. You could make the piglin brutes snout larger, or you could make the piglins snout smaller, depending on which was easier and more clear. And to go back to the horses, I think the horses all look like cows, especially the brown horse, like the dark brown horse. It looks like a cow because their snouts in game are much more boxy. If you look at the sniffer and the sniffer egg, and if you took that same sniffer snout shape, recolored it, and put it on any of the horse eggs, I think they immediately become more recognizable as a horse compared to what they do now, because horse heads are just not shaped like that. Horses don't have like chubby cheeks like a pig or a goat, right? And so it's a little bit different in that way. One thing I will say though is that the horses, one of them benefits from the white stripe. That to me, probably because I'm just more familiar with that texture, does make me think horse because of that white stripe. So sometimes the lack of eyes is helped with, a facial feature or a fur feature or pattern that really distinguishes that mob from others. But I think in general, that breaking the rules for eyes is a good one. And they've also been inconsistent like that. The Endermite has, I think that's a single eye in the middle of it coming out of the egg. And the tadpole has got eyes, unless those are tadpole nostrils, which would be weird. So putting eyes on things that are so small or things that don't have noses, I think would be fine. Putting eyes on the fish eggs or putting red eyes on the spiders, I totally agree with that. I don't know about the squid. The squid is a really weak one too. I actually feel like a lot of the aquatic mobs suffer from having the little puddle of water underneath them. We were talking about the silhouette of the egg, and it breaks the silhouette of the egg, but it doesn't do it in a clear way. It kind of just adds like a bump to it. And if you put these all in complete blackout and you looked at them, like, I wouldn't be able to tell what any of the aquatic ones are, with the exception of maybe the guardians, because they have those extra bits sticking out. Because there's no fins on the top of the fish. It's only the dorsal fins that stick out. And a really good example I'm trying to look for here. Yeah, the puffer fish. The puffer fish dorsal fins are kind of like the cyan turquoisey color. And then the blue puddle underneath it, it all kind of just gels together and looks like it's a big dish where you can't really see where the fish starts and the puddle begins. So I feel like the fish could be, clearer by just getting rid of the puddle. Like I think that the colors, like the salmon colors, are clear. The scales on the cod are clear. The tropical fish stripes are clear. I think that kind of stuff is enough. And if they get rid of the puddle, they might be able to make those eggs just a little bit bigger and fit in a little bit more detail to match with everything else.
I didn't struggle as much with the aquatic ones, but I think having arranged them side by side like this really helped. I think the salmon was the first one that kind of cracked the code for me, and I was like, oh, okay, if I'm looking for the cod, then I'm just looking for the one that has water underneath it. Because at first I was getting confused between the cod and the frogs, and then the frogs kind of have a similar like underbelly, like lighter patch to them that looks kind of similar to the cod. But then I figured out that because frogs are semi-aquatic, they're not in the water all the time, they were the ones that didn't have the water underneath, and it clicked for me. The one aquatic mob I don't like the design of is the dolphin. And it's because you don't see any of the dolphin's face, really. Like, it's supposed to be kind of the back of it with the fin, the tail, and, like, the flippers sort of to either side. But I don't see any of the dolphin's face in that. It's, like, the only one that we're kind of seeing from the top down instead of from the front. And that confuses the heck out of me. It's sort of like it's diving into the little puddle of water at the bottom of it. And for whatever reason, when I was looking at a jumbled screenshot of them where I wasn't sure where the dolphin was going to be, I had difficulty deciding what that one egg even was until I, again, probably by process of elimination, recognized, oh yeah, that's probably supposed to be a dolphin. But yeah, it's an odd one. It really doesn't feel like it fits the same, you're looking at the face of the creature, sort of motif that they've established for the rest of them. And the Guardians get a free pass from that because their colors are so distinctive, because it's really obviously that sort of orange on greenish blue skin that they have, and that makes a lot more sense to me as a silhouette than the dolphin one does. Strangely, the more I've looked at this, and this didn't occur to me as I was taking notes, but I think the Enderman one was a bit of a curveball to begin with, because what you have there is a fairly solid, normal egg shape, but quite large because of the height of the Enderman, but because of the bulk of the egg, I was thinking that was Ender Dragon for a while.
Same.
And then I realized that the splotches of purple, because they haven't painted the Enderman's face on there, because they aren't giving them eyes, the splotches of purple there are the particles that Endermen give off when they teleport. And that feels strange. Like, that feels like another odd decision when most of the time you are looking at the face of the mob, or at least like the general like top to bottom look of the mob. It feels a little bit strange that the Enderman is represented that way. The other thing, I think probably my least favorite out of all of these, is the Stray. And once again, I understand what they're going for, because it has the same colors, it has the sort of ragged approach to the clothing, but there's not enough in there to identify it as a skeleton for me. And so I looked at that one for a little while and just went, I don't know which one this is. And it feels very strange. It sort of feels like a rock that you'd find in a cave, rather than being very obviously like a cold skeleton variant. And so I don't know what they can do to that to give that a better attempt, other than to really reinforce the skeletal face in there. I just don't see it from the pixel art they've done for the Stray Egg at all, where the Bogged is much more obvious because it's got a mushroom growing out of one side of it, and the skeleton, while still a little bit on the weaker side for me, it is there. It's got the crack that the skeleton skull has in it, which is also kind of funny because it's like it's a crack in an egg, you know? And the eye sockets are implied at the bottom of it quite strongly compared to the Stray Egg, which has no sign of eye sockets on it whatsoever. So I think maybe that one needs another pass at it before it's perfect, if they're still doing iterations on any of these designs.
Yeah, I think one of the things that you could do with the skeleton mobs would be deeper, darker eyes, even if you want to keep them low like that, to have the crack in the skull, which I do think is amusing. Or if you raise the eyes up a little bit and you gave the bottom of the egg a teeth shape, like a half a skull, like a skull without the jawbone, I think would be, when you think about like a skull and crossbones symbol or an emoji, it's usually just the top half, not the jaw included. And I think that could be a little bit clearer as far as the silhouette goes. I didn't tag the Stray at all. Like somebody had to tell me that that's what that was. I was not looking for that at all. Something that I was thinking about as you're talking about the Ender Dragon and the Enderman eggs. The Enderman egg could be the same height but skinny. Like, what if you made it like, you ever see like a dinosaur egg? Like, they tend to be like really long and skinny, and that could also help with the height, but also not like imply any kind of like volume or girth to the Enderman. And I think who was it? I think Emery's in our chat. No, sorry, the Great Arcana mentioned that Enderman eyes are so iconic. Is it not enough for them to be included in this? And I think that there are certainly a number of ways you could break those rules and get away with it. I think Enderman is one of them. I think, to your point, that we're not looking at the back of the dolphin. I think that's supposed to be the snout of a dolphin, but without the eyes, who knows? Like,
Yeah,
is it the front? Is the
you
back?
wouldn't know. Yeah.
You wouldn't know. And I think that's the kind of situation where, like, add the eyes to the dolphin. I think that's fine. I mean, most of the fish, I think, are okay without the eyes. But in some cases, it could help, especially because you're talking about like probably one single black pixel for each eyeball. The other thing that is surprising is that frogs, the texture in the world, they're mostly eyeballs. Like the eyes on a frog are huge in this game. That could be one, very funny, but also really clear, especially because you have the eyes on the tadpole. So if you had them next to each other, you could very distinctly see almost like the tadpole growing up into the frog. And I think that could be a good way to differentiate them. I also, when you're talking about some of the nether mobs feeling a little bit lackluster, I'm surprised we don't have blaze rods floating around the blaze egg. Or if we do, they're really subtle. And I think that maybe having 2 or 3 of them break the border of the egg would help sell it. They might have been going more minimalist because the breeze egg is so simple, but the breeze egg has those eyebrows that break the wall of the egg silhouette. And I think having vertical blaze rods like look like they're traveling around the blaze egg would be very, very cool. It would be a really fun design project actually to go in here and try to flex pixel art chops and see if there's a way to come up with small fixes or constructive feedback for these kind of things to make them more readable. Because the other one that I didn't find very good was the magma cube. That to me is just like it's. I mean, one, it's hard because of course it's a cube, but they did it with the slime. The slime egg is like, it looks slimy, so I'm not sure what they could do differently with the magma cube. I don't know why it has stripes, because the stripe to me, like, well, it's not a bee because it's the wrong colors, but it reminds me of an insect more than it does a magma cube. So like I don't know. There's a couple of things that I think where they've set up some really fun, quirky design rules, as you've mentioned, with like the no eyes. Often it's a nose or an oversized nose. I like the scale that they've done with some of them, but I really feel like they could break the rules a little bit more and get eyeballs in there specifically for like bugs or fantasy creatures. I think that would really help, because the Ender Dragon is a very strange one. It looks like a purple cat. Like it doesn't scream dragon to me at all.
Yeah, purple cat or purple horse or something like that. Yeah, it's got some odd features to it, but I think it's close enough to being recognizable as the Ender Dragon. And I think the magma cube stood out enough to me, mostly because there are a few other mobs that are that color, and the stripes are meant to just be the bits where it jumps and the cube kind of splits apart, which slimes don't do. So you can't necessarily have the same effect happen from a slime. But then you see the glowy internal bits of... Maybe it's just because I've been working on a Froglight farm, but I've seen that a lot from magma cubes lately, so that might all be part of it. That's where we're going to wrap up this episode of The Spawn Chunks. I'm sure folks have lots of opinions about these spawn eggs, so if you'd like to send in your tier lists or any further feedback you have for the Mojang team and you want to share on the show, once again, the email address is spawnchunkmail@gmail.com. Get them in. But in the meantime, you can find more information about the show and links to some of the stuff that we've talked about today over at thespawnchunks.com. The music for the show is composed by me, and The Spawn Chunks is proud as ever to be a listener-supported podcast. Even more proud now that our Patreon campaign is up and running with our new subscription tiers. You can get more value out of the show by putting some value back in at patreon.com/thespawnchunks. Joining our community there by pledging at any level gets you an invite to our patrons-only Discord chat. You can listen to the show live when we record it every Monday. You can also join our monthly hangouts where our patrons get to let us know what they've been up to in Minecraft that month. Once again, the next one of those should be coming up on Saturday, March 1st. We have 292 patrons right now, which is down 4 from last week. We'd love to welcome more people in now that we've got the Patreon back-end stuff sorted out. Special thanks go to our content engineer patrons. That's Hunter555, Jumbo Sale, Mindtrip Media, Party Voyager, and Yitz. Thank you all for your support on this episode.
Sharing the podcast with your friends is the easiest way to support the show. It's free to just poke a friend in the arm and say, hey, you should listen to The Spawn Chunks. You can find us at The Spawn Chunks on social media. That now includes TikTok and YouTube Shorts and Instagram Stories, where you can find clips of the show, little jokes that we make, fun, poignant moments in the conversation. We're sharing those on social media, so feel free to share those around with your friends should you desire. The new episodes are available on Mondays, and that goes for the YouTube channel as well, where the video version of the podcast is located. located. You can email the show at spawnchunkmail@gmail.com. The RSS feed is on the spawnchunks.com, and the patron-only RSS feed is on the Patreon page. That's where you can listen to the render distance, the extended version of the program.
My name is Johnny, but online I go by Pixelriffs. You can find most of what I do at youtube.com/pixelriffs, where the Minecraft Survival Guide is currently in its 3rd season. I also stream 3 days a week on Twitch, where I do behind-the-scenes work for my YouTube series and play other games from time to time. I'm also the voice of the unofficial Hermitcraft recap, which you can find through a quick YouTube search. And aside from that, I'm at Pixelriffs on both Blue Sky and Instagram. Joel, where can people find you online?
Everything that I'm doing online can be found at joelduggan.com. That includes a link to the Citadel Cafe, my other podcast about sci-fi and fantasy entertainment. I'm off to see Captain America Brave New World tonight, so we'll be talking about that on the next episode, and probably the first episode of Daredevil Born Again by the time we record, so look forward to that. You can find me on social media at Joel Duggan and Joel Duggan on Twitch, where I stream Tuesday through Saturday at 1 o'clock Atlantic. That's UTC minus 4 hours for friends around the world. Come on by.
Thanks for visiting the Spawn Chunks. The world outside is infinite, and so are the egg puns.